This afternoon I'm at Ghost Lake, and I got with me my old friend Macdonald Stainsby. He's up here from the coast. I'm gonna ask him some questions when we get up to the lake. But first, I thought I'd show him the sights. What do you think of that shit?
Well, we're looking at remarkable. The strength of the water right now is really, really imposing. I haven't seen it like this for quite a while. Right.
The upper falls are even crazier, just wait.
Well,
This is like a series of chutes, that's what I like about it so much.
I like the strength of these mountains too. They're very young.
There it is. This is bad news.
My God.
I didn't think it happened. Get on! I'll watch the video later. They try mopping this. So I'm sitting here with Macdonald Stainsby, my old friend here. Let's ask him a couple questions about this life, this world, life, the universe, everything. I'm interested in your point of view about climate change, environmentalism, what places like this bring up in your heart, you know, what they bring to your mind.
Well, those, unfortunately, right these days are definitely two different things. What they bring to my heart is what got me involved in environmentalism in the first place. The kind of response that you have in the gut. I was lucky to be raised by primarily a mother who wanted to spend time out on the land, not just encouraged, but basically almost mandated it be so. And one of the best things that happened to me. So when I started to understand political realities around places like this as an adult, that further cemented the kind of things that I was going to try to do with my life.
You were talking to about how you were raised with reason, and how you were raised to think like a correct argument should win an argument, and how that's changed.
Okay, well, if we're going to talk about something like, for example, climate change is a perfect one for that, yeah. I never really realized it as such when I was a kid that it was a privilege. To me, it was just the way things were, that you would get around and discuss with, in my case, my elders, and in particular, I'm thinking of my mother and my uncle. And you presented facts and made an argument, and if you were able to use those facts to prove something once, that was it. It was just over, and everybody collectively just moved on. You've now all collectively grown because this has been established as a fact, and that was the way of, seeking knowledge. That's what it was, and that's what they were imparted to me, and I didn't realize that wasn't just like a human trait. Those were values I was very lucky to be given, but they should be a human trait because we see times like today in matters like climate change. We see things with the way the war works, the way the entire pandemic was handled, the way we're supposed to discuss issues like Israel, Zionism, etc. All of these things have denied us the ability to just concretely bring forward actual verifiable facts, show them to everybody, spend the time on it. You do have to get to know things that you're not necessarily comfortable with and necessarily an expert on, but do that once, then you can move on. Today we often have conversations and we can get to a point where we all agree for that conversation. And then the next time we see our friends, our family, the people that we had these disputes with in the first place, they're back to saying the same old things. And now we've taken on the idea that instead of facts being things that we use evidence and measure, things like, what's human rights law, what's the international law, how do we treat this country the same as every other country when it comes to climate change? How do you stop climate change? And does it actually happen? Yes, it does. How do you stop it? By reducing these types of destructive projects, etc. These things are easily verifiable, but we have to keep retreading them because we're no longer looking at fact. We're now wearing personalities that speak lines. Oh, you brought up climate change. That doesn't exist. Ha, ha, ha. Oh, you brought up the pandemic. You're wearing your mask because you're afraid. Ha, ha, ha. You like to talk about Israel. That's because you're an anti-Semite. Ha, ha, ha. And you can be forced into repeating ad nauseum these things. But what's really powerful about being forced to repeat these things ad nauseum is that you get exhausted. They throw out a one-liner. It's actually really good at diverting your energy. It stops anything from actually moving forward. If progressive is supposed to mean something, it means to progress. And you can't progress if you're constantly rehashing the same old material. Why are you doing that? Because we're now campus. We no longer think of ourselves in a collective process with other people. You can do that under capitalism. You don't have to be under a government or an organized society that puts people ahead of profit on everything. You can actually have communities that care about each other and don't become tribalist over just denying basic facts and make it into, what you're talking about as a bar trick. If you want a bar trick, play pool.
Yeah, it's I find that often now. Like I make a weather forecast, and it's something crazy happens, like some snow on Sunday or Saturday morning there in southern British Columbia. Next thing you know, there's like all the HARP bots show up, and HARP, and that's not natural, and it's geoengineering. Relating to like what you were just saying, like what's the role of science denial, you think, and conspiracy theories in the rise of authoritarianism and irrational social movements like we seem to be experiencing? Okay, now it's back on you.
All right. What makes it so frustrating is that what that's doing entirely is it's focused on not convincing us that these things are true. Sure, there'll be a marginal group of people, often, lacking the critical thinking skills that are a matter of education, not about being brilliant or not. Some of those things are unfortunately denied. And so there will be people who believe that. Fine. That is actually less damaging than the people who are convinced that the prevalence of these conspiracy theories, while I don't believe them, they must have at least some rational point or they wouldn't be this strong. Therefore, we're going to treat discussions around climate change as, up in the air. We'll have the person over here who's going to talk to you about the scientific way that they've been able to study all the historical weather patterns, geological research, and so on, and what that means for current and future plans around the climate, versus your Uncle Bill, who watched a really cool YouTube video yesterday, that was entirely based on somebody else just making stuff up. And when we give those equal weight, educated people start to just question themselves and fall by the wayside. So the impact in bringing about authoritarianism isn't in creating a great number of people who, for example, think vaccines don't work. It's about creating enough dissent within that to cause just enough chaos and disbelief in scientists. We watched V when we were kids, V, the miniseries. At least those of us over 35 probably did. Yeah. And when we saw V, the miniseries, who did they want to get? They wanted to get the scientists, because the scientists were going to identify who it was that was actually the problem and why. Isn't that the case today when it comes to climate change, when it comes to denying medical care in the United States and so on? These conspiracy theories are generally about just creating confusion about who's actually there to blame. It's not about actually having a lot of people believe there's actually lizard people, whether it's V or David Icke that talks about the lizards. We have to deal with reality. And reality is becoming an ideology. It's not an ideology. It's the playing field. The ideology is what we do with it.
Well, and opposing rationalism was a hallmark of fascist movements in the 30s as well, and as well as anywhere else that's ever happened.
And the way Zionism operates today isn't to say every single person in Canada and the United States, for example, need to jump up and down and celebrate Israel and put their flags up on the wall and go out on May 15th and call it, Liberation Day instead of the Nakba. That's not what they require. They require scaring the hell out of people that if they speak up, their lives will be destroyed. They won't be able to continue to work where they work. They won't be able to have the friends that they have. It'll ruin their dinner plans. It'll absolutely wreck their families. And so they do what the Nazis found was just as effective as having people come out to the rallies, which is stay home and not do anything. If you're willing to do that, they're willing to meet you halfway and say, that's all we need. You didn't get in our way. And Zionist lies and just preponderance of fear is clearly it's an authoritarianism of the mind. I say the Canadian government hasn't yet become authoritarian in the way it sends out police to beat people in the same manner that you might see in parts of Pakistan, for example. Let's just throw out one that's been seen recently. what you'll end up with is a situation where it's less authoritarian, but they're promoting totalitarianism of our own minds. And that is created for being afraid to be rational. If you are rational around what's going on with Israel, you're going to lose a whole lot of favor with a whole lot of powerful people. If you're rational about vaccines, people might come after you in your neighborhood. If you're rational about the weather and talk about climate change, you're going to need that. If you're trying to buy property, you're going to have to figure out what the climate in that particular neighborhood is likely to do to your property as it gets more extreme over the next 20 years. Denying climate change is the fastest way to go broke. You want to buy a house and go live out in the mountains, that's awesome. Make sure it's not one that's going to burn up. You better live in a world where climate change is real or you're going to lose your house. Like that's what we've done to ourselves. And that's why we've got to start actually dealing with rationality and making plans based on that. This is all about trying to make sure we can't think. And if we can't think, we're easy to dominate.
Last point on that I'll get you to speak on. And I think too, like the role of irrational movements too is when it's connected to the postmodernity in the sense that, nothing matters, nothing's true, that's your truth, right? And if you like start to muddy what is actually true, then you start to muddy, well, what actually matters. And if like a large segment of the population is like, well, nothing really matters, that's your truth, all that matters is yourself, then you can easily find ourselves into a social situation where we just destroy everything around us in our own self-interest.
Yeah. When it comes to, for example, the difference between personal and private property and our relations to that, you can also look at that on other things. Like my personal truth, that should be something that is my personal right and not something that is like somebody else's to judge if it's about my lived experience. Like my truth is that, growing up in Greater Vancouver, I've seen an environmental decline, and it would be very hard for evidence to tell me otherwise because I've experienced it. But still, my truth wouldn't be able to say, oh, this is empirically stronger on something that I didn't experience. And I don't experience what climate change theory is. I don't experience like things beyond that realm, right? And the efficacy of knowledge is not something that is personalized. Like, my truth about what my life is like with my mother at home, that's my truth. But whether or not I lived in a single-parent home is not my truth. That's just truth. I lived in a single-parent home. And we've got to be really good about understanding that difference. Because it doesn't just create isolation of where you are. It creates an isolation of the mind where you can be surrounded by 10,000 other people. But if you live in a world that's your own making, that's completely different than theirs, you're not going to do well. In the pandemic, how many people who transmitted the virus to somebody they loved were people who believed that the virus didn't exist? Why did that happen? Well, we can talk about how that happened, and that's not about blaming every person who has that. It is about attacking the embracing of these anti-knowledge theories. Right now, the best ones that we've got is that the world is telling us that Iran is a danger to us. We're being told by the major media stories over and over, Iran is a danger to us, and they've got a dangerous nuclear program, which is a different thing than a nuclear weapon. A nuclear program exists in southern Ontario to power a lot of homes, and has existed in other ways. Do I approve of nuclear power? No, but that's a different story entirely. That's my own personal opinion. It's not a very good idea. It will be destructive in uranium mining and refining, too dangerous. No disposal solutions really exist yet, etc., etc. But that's my opinion. To have civilian nuclear power is non-negotiable. That's a right. And that's all they've ever actually had. Everything else we're hearing is a smokescreen. One country had broken international law. During Nuremberg, the highest crime in history was recorded as being to start an aggressive, illegal, unnecessary war. That's what got people hanged at Nuremberg. It wasn't for the crimes of the Shoah. The crimes of the Shoah were well documented. It's one of the most absolutely meticulously papered out crimes in history. But it's the crime of starting a war on Poland, starting a war on Britain, starting a war on the Soviet Union that made Nazis, have a rope put around their necks. So what do we have today? We have Israel clearly doing it. We have Israel clearly violating international law. We have what they're doing to starve the population of Gaza, being something that triggers every single humanitarian law there is. The one thing the media isn't saying is that international law around human rights and genocide is actually affirmative. You do not have the right to say no. If Joey and I are walking down the street right now in Wells, and you're not actually connected with the fire department in any way, and there's a house on fire, we don't legally have to do anything about it. Genocide does not work that way with countries. If you see a genocide, you are obligated not to just stand back and not make it worse. You actively have to try to stop it. So anything less than that isn't being talked about. We don't hear that basic fact. That's the cornerstone. The reason there's such limited amounts of loopholes in it, there's almost no way you can come up with a but reason to commit these kinds of acts that are being committed to Gaza. The reason there's no justification possible is because it was written on the backs of the Shoah. That's why it is so airtight. And that's why we can't hear about how it actually exists. The very same West that propped it up to justify their rule in the first place after World War II are the ones that are tearing it down, and they're doing so to help defend the most defenseless, most worthless human crime possible. That's a fact based on law. I'm not a lawyer, but the interpretation of international law is very clear on genocide. Like I say, they don't have a unless or in the case of, except for that. Those clauses aren't there.
In one hand, we're worried about telling everyone to be worried about Iran's nuclear program, but maybe what we should be worried about is the oil war that goes on surrounding them, and what all this means for our long-term stability. Thanks, Macdonald. Let's go find a new place to go today.